All right, Richard Young, little intro. This isn't like we're broadcasting to many people, but to continue on with the conversation, these
Yeah.
are meant to meander, man. These are I love the structure of all the podcasts I listen to.
Uh-huh.
I love that, but what gets lost is some of the, call it authenticity, call it genuineness
Sure.
of just conversation that happens, man. But okay, so we already established in our early conversation, you and I have next to no knowledge of each other.
Yeah, I'm just like my friend Hui's like, Jake's gonna message you. I said, who? uh, and so yeah, man, your background, you're an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I'm an entrepreneur. I did my first company was called Ampersand. That's actually where I met Hui. Did
Okay.
brand and product development. We were mainly out of Portland, Honolulu, and then did international work.
Uh-huh.
And then at the end of that, I saw this huge problem that I experienced every day, that I saw all the independent contractors and people like Hui who'd work out of my office doing, and then all the big brands too.
Mm-hmm.
And so we invested some technology, and we decided to give it a go. And so now I'm in year 2 of that, and just going through the ultimate product technology startup world, man. But what about yourself?
Man, well, my name's Richard. I'm 40 years old. I just recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, my whole life has been in education. I've never taught, but I've always either worked in administration at a school or something like that. And just in the last 3 years, I've been doing ministry online. I feel like when someone says, "What do you do?" It's a tough question. I'm a stay-at-home dad who does ministry online. And so that's what I
Okay.
do.
Yeah.
I get a chance to talk to a ton of people. I put content out on Instagram that's based around this idea of the gospel. And then I run a podcast and I do Bible studies all week long. And so I never thought in a million years like that this would be my life, but this is what I get to do, man. And so people come in and they ask me questions all the time about, I just had a guy call me today and he's driving to work. He works in sales and it's a tough job. And he just called me up and he's like, man, I am feeling anxious. What do I do? And I know this brother, like he's a real good friend of mine. And I said, why are you anxious? So we just started talking about the anxiety and the pressure that his boss is putting on him. And I said, okay, my man, what's the worst that can happen? And he's like, see, that's the thing. I'm not even afraid of getting fired. I just want to walk out what it means to have peace in my job. And I said, okay, man, he will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee because he trusteth in thee, Isaiah 26:3. Like we have that, like, and then I gave him another Bible verse, Colossians 3, set your mind on things above where your life is hidden in Christ. To God, I said, you're a spiritual person. These people that you're working with, perhaps they're not spiritual, but you see things on a spiritual plane. Okay, so you're going to work today. You're not seeing it like the rest of them. And that way you can have perfect peace. And then we went to one more verse. That's Philippians chapter 4, where he says, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So because of all of this, like we can tell anxiety, nah, man, I'm good. Like I have made my request to God. He loves me and his peace will protect my heart. And so I get to do things like that where I get to encourage people all the time. And it in turn, it encourages me. It probably encourages me more than them. And so I get to do that. That's kind of my life, is encouraging people, kind of discipling people in the truth of who they are. So many people don't know the truth of who they are. And because of that, they're trying to find themselves. They're trying to figure it out. And I'm just kind of blessed that I can see right through that. And I can see who you are because I know who you are, because I know who I am. And yeah, man, it's super fun. It's a huge blessing to see the light switch on with people when they realize who they are, and they perhaps haven't seen it yet.
So you started off as a teacher. So wait, was this a transition? Had you always been doing like the podcasting, the ministry online side, or was a transition a couple of years ago?
Yeah, man. I actually lost my job right before the pandemic. Literally, if the pandemic, I don't know if you were watching, I have this vivid memory of watching the Sacramento game. I don't know who Sacramento was playing, but in the middle, maybe it's like the Pacers or something. In the middle of
Yeah.
this game, they shut it down because of the pandemic.
I
Okay.
remember that.
So the
Yeah.
Chiefs win the Super Bowl. I'm from Kansas City. The next week, I started losing my job. I was losing my, like, going on, like, figuring out if I was going to lose my job. That lasted a month. When that finished, that was the beginning of March. COVID really shut everything down maybe less than 10 days later.
Yeah.
And so I lost my job, and then I started working at an Amazon warehouse. And I lost my job because I was saying I worked at a Christian institution, and I was saying things that some of the people didn't like, so the leadership didn't like, and so they were like, "Nah, we can't have this guy around." I ended up losing my job. COVID hits, and I ended up going to work at an Amazon warehouse. I worked at an Amazon warehouse for half a year. I worked the night shift at an Amazon warehouse, and it was a cool experience. It was hard. It was not fun at some points, but there were so many beautiful people there that I got to encourage and pour life into, and I got to be encouraged by them. And then someone kept coming up to me, like a couple friends were like, "Richard," at this point, I'm like going online or doing Instagram lives, talking about the gospel, talking about the truth that changed my life. And people are like, "You need to do a podcast." And I was like, "What? Like, that sounds like hard. I don't. How do you even start?" And so a couple people kind of just pushed me to do this podcast. And I have this group of friends that Hui is in. It's more of a family. Like we're just super tight. And they said, "Yeah, you should do this thing." And so they kind of pushed me forward. And the first episode is with my buddy Tyler, and he just tells his story. And his story is pretty much he was addicted to porn, and it was not ruining. It had pretty much destroyed his marriage up to that point. And then the truth of the gospel comes in, and his life is radically changed. And so the first episode of this podcast is this wild story of my buddy whose marriage, like, literally almost falls apart. And then God just kind of shows him these things that he didn't know about himself. And in turn, he's able to love his wife even while she hates him. And so that's his story is the first story. Her story, because they actually got reconciled, is the next episode. And it might be even a more wild story, wilder. I don't know if that she saw the truth of who she was in a night where she was finally had decided that she was going to divorce him. Someone sees who she actually is, sees through the fog, through the garbage, and sees, no, this is who you actually are. And her life gets radically changed. And so I didn't know it was going to be a testimony podcast, but that's what it ended up being. Is people come on and they tell their story of how realizing who they actually are, realizing they've been, and I don't know if this is a spiritual podcast or a spiritual thing that you have here. Sorry if I'm talking too much about this, but that when they see who they are and what God has done for them in reconciling them back to himself through Jesus, how it radically changed their life. It's not like just like a little religion, like, oh yeah, religion is cool and God's cool. It's actually a transformational message that changes your life forever. And so, yeah, I get the privilege of collecting these stories on my podcast. It's called the Death to Life podcast. We're in our kind of like our third season. I think we've done 131 or 132 episodes, and they come out weekly. It's crazy fun to just hear these stories of people's lives transform. So yeah, education my whole life up until about 3 years ago. Once the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, they said hell would freeze over before the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. It wasn't hell freezing over. It's like my life got changed right after the Chiefs won the Super Bowl.
I love that, man. I mean, there's so many things out of what you just said that I want to pull. I mean, I'll answer the last question first and then get into the other ones, right? But
sure.
Because you even said a word that I had pulled out today, that I had just written down earlier.
Oh,
and then
really?
you talked about it in supplication. It's it's something that just was bought in. Now, to answer your last question first, though, is, no, man, this is a totally agnostic podcast. If anything, it's about a vlogging journey of uh, talking to people and growing a business and this type of growth. But, I'll bring it back to Hui, especially since, this is the fourth episode that I'm recording.
Okay.
Right. So this is early on, small audience, just meant
Cool.
for me in a small group right now. But it's interesting, man, is like, I feel like people nowadays are very hesitant to talk openly about much. Right. I would always make fun of Portland. I still make fun of Portland, but I was like, it's the only city where you have to look over your shoulders before you say anything, or you apologize before you make a statement. Right. And that's not a cool world to me. It's not. I believe in radical candor. I believe that people should be exactly who they are. And I believe that the magic is being open to others being exactly who they are. Right. And I include that in the workplace. Right. So, Hui and I used to wax poetically all the time. Right. And I saw him during his, as he went through his kind of, I think he would call it rebirth. Right. When he and he and I would talk theology all the time. I always root it back to, into work, into theory, into reading. I grew up in a, both my parents are, scientists effectively. Right. But I went to a private religious school. It was Episcopalian. And I tell everybody this story that, I didn't have a lot of purpose early on. I didn't really know what I was doing. I had my own path to it. It wasn't faith, but faith was always ingrained in our education.
Sure.
And I had this magical moment when I was in middle school, and I was in, one of our Bible classes, and I was being a smart aleck in some which way or another. And Father David, who actually officiated my sister's wedding as well, he's a great dude. He sat me down at one point when I was, giving him feedback on whatever it was we were discussing the day. And he sat me down privately and he said, Jake, hold on. He's like, you have to understand that I'm not trying to convince you of something. He's like, I'm trying to get you to understand that there is a greater purpose. There is a greater thing than yourself. And so when you look at all of these things, I want you to understand that. And he, to me, said, whatever that path is for you, if that is art, if that is science, if that is faith, whatever, he's like, you have to know that I and this, and he pointed to the Bible, support you. And to me, I sat there and I was like, man, if there's ever been somebody that commanded my respect with his acceptance and all of that, I was like, that's him. Right. That was Father David, because he provided a place that didn't hit back at me because I didn't agree or didn't understand at the time. He just said, no, I get it. Let's talk through it. And that was very formative for me, right? Even in longer term, without getting into my whole journey, because when it comes to work, just to transfer it back, one of the big things that we deal with and that I would love to talk to you about, of not just growing your podcast and seeing that organically in your path, right? But it's also about something that I pulled out from what you're saying, which is purpose.
Yeah.
And understanding purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, you talk about anxiety, you're talking to somebody who was medicated for his anxiety. Right. And I've been medicated for depression, anxiety, this, that, and the other. And I've always taken a personal path towards reconciling it with myself before I start looking at the outside world to solve it for me. So I was put on prescriptions and nobody knew that I stopped taking them because I wanted to make sure that I could find it myself first. And that was just a path I did through learning and being stubborn, maybe whatever it was, but it was finding a purpose really. And it was saying like, hey, do I want to have to rely on these outside aspects, or can I take this quote unquote weakness, this thing that everybody's trying to medicate out of me, and can I champion it myself? And can I build that? And can I do these daily tasks, these daily things to help myself get over it? And by no means have I solved it. By no means am I rid of it, But I have been able to now like get those instances where to this day, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I get a little anxious. I'm running a startup, right? It's like we're going into funding. We have to deal with, you know, people rely on me for their well-being.
Yeah.
And people have trusted me with their money, and to turn that into an investment, right? Which money is a very anxiety driven thing.
Jake, you're a high energy guy, right?
Relatively.
Yeah, high energy. You like to start things?
Oh yeah.
How's your follow through?
Good.
You have
Better
good
than
follow
normal.
through. Okay.
Yeah.
You're different than me. I have not been, I'm sure I have ADHD. I'm 100% positive I have it.
Yeah.
I don't see it as a weakness. I see it because there's positive things that come with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's an ultra sensitivity.
Yep.
There's a ultra, like I'm sensitive. Sometimes it doesn't show it because I act like I don't care, but I can feel how people are moving and behaving. So there are good things that come with ADHD as well. And it's not necessarily like you can't focus on one thing. It's literally you're so focused on one thing that you can't hear other things. Like when my wife is trying to talk to me and I'm reading something, she's like, I've been talking for 2 minutes. And I'm like, I literally couldn't hear you because I am so focused on this thing. Sometimes when people have something like they get a fear or something, they don't know what like the gift is behind it. And I'm not saying you have ADHD. I'm saying you and I, it feels like you, if you're friends with Hui too, which I think Hui is in the same boat. We're high energy, we're ultra sensitive. But sometimes that stuff gets medicated out of us because we don't fit in a certain box or something like that. But Jake, your purpose is very simple from my perspective, man. And that it's to shine. That's your purpose. There's nobody else like you. And there's nobody else who can do the things that you do all in one person. Maybe there's somebody who's great at startups, and maybe there's somebody who's great at having conversations, and there's a bunch of other things that you're good at. None of those things are in one person like they are in you. Like you're the only one. And so your purpose is to shine. Your purpose is that people see your good works. They're like, man, that guy, what a loving dude. That is what you were created for. Now, whether it's in this startup that you're doing now, or if it's a different startup, or if it's pumping gas, like you're the guy, not the things that you produce. It's you. It's how you operate in this field that you're in, and that can lead to so much anxiety. But your purpose is to move through that with peace. Your purpose is to move through that, knowing that if it falls apart, it actually doesn't say anything about you.
Oh,
It
100%.
doesn't. You know what I'm saying?
100%, man. I consider myself lucky because I have had a relatively distinct understanding of what I've wanted to do from a young age. Right. I was about 16 and I was able to clearly define a path that I wanted to go forward. Now, was it without its hurdles? No. But to that, I have always had, you know, my particular perspective is that I've had my own little chip on my shoulder.
What is
right?
that chip?
For me, the chip was always that there's no one solution for everything. And that I saw too often people that I knew that would be forced into a quote unquote solution before people truly understood the problem. Right. And ADHD is a perfect example, right? Of, I was diagnosed and medicated for that too. It was the 90s, right? We're about the same age. I'm a little bit younger, but we're in the age of prescription drugs, right?
Yeah.
When everybody was just, oh, he's a hyper adolescent male, put him on no, it's like, that's hormones. You know, it's like, give me a football, let me run around the field and then see if I concentrate better, right?
Yeah.
Or don't give me a bunch of sugar and caffeine all day and maybe I'll sit still.
Absolutely.
But regardless, I would see ADHD, right? Of kids that had great talent at one thing and then they weren't accepted into another. Now, personally, a very hyper specific example, and even what I'm solving now with every day with my company, I was lucky enough to understand both the linear and the abstract because I went to a STEM school that was a very good school, but I also had this understanding of the visual arts and that kinesthetic way of learning. But it was highly oriented towards the linear factor, right? Math, science, equations, etc. Now, when I got to school, to college, right, I was put into, more advanced math and engineering classes because it was an architecture program in art school. So it wasn't a super advanced thing, but I was able to do it, but it was for visual people. So I thrived. And I saw this bridge that happened. And then in business, I found this more and more so, where I would see when a creative and very visual oriented person was paired up with a linear and equative person, and they would actually be able to connect and collaborate, magic would happen. I have the saying that was kind of a reaction to the last 3 years, that if you celebrate diversity, you celebrate difference. Right. And it's because I very much believe that the more difference you bring to solving a problem, the better off you'll be. You don't look for, if you have Gideon's knot, you don't look for 5 people that have exactly the same perspective to try to solve that. You want 5 different people from 5 different backgrounds bringing their input to that.
Right.
Right. That's the best possible situation that you can bring. And I would see the opposite way. So me, back to my purpose, my path, I was always trying to take that chip, which was like, hey, I'm a visual guy and I'm around all these intuitive, creative, visual people. Great example, man. That dude is brilliant and he gets it. Now he's ADHD as all as all, man. It's one of the things I love about
real recognize real, right? I know we know.
What is it? Yeah, what's the saying? A fisherman recognize another fisherman from afar.
Yeah,
you see him on top of the ocean jumping around. But that's one of the things I love about him, because he has a thirst for knowledge and an understanding of that without that he could not gain. And so, we're doing this on a technological side, which I'm not going to bore you with right now. But to the point is, like, if we can provide an instance where we connect people of, in business, it's different functions, different expertise, but in life, it's people of different backgrounds and different opinions and perspectives, and put them into the same place and remove the barriers and let them have their discussions, we're going to be in a better place than if we just cohort everybody into like-minded individuals that all think alike. It's like, well, that's just going to create a problem down the line. Do you ever, I'm curious, in your readings, because you're obviously a well-read guy and you obviously read the Bible a lot. Do you ever read like Stoic philosophy?
Give me an example, like the guy Ryan
Marcus
Holiday
Aurelius.
who writes all those books about the Stoics. Have you read any of his books?
There's Marcus Aurelius, right? The notebooks.
I haven't.
Okay. So regardless of whether you've read, like, Stoicism has some fundamental principles that I like, but there's one that always popped out to me. I keep it on my little Kindle. It's a good little quippy reading. Ancient Rome, right around 0 BC.
Okay.
Right. So it's always interesting to read other things that were written at the same time.
Sure.
And one of the things that pops up in Marcus Aurelius, right? He was a Roman emperor later. And he writes in his reflections on how to be a good person, how to manage. He was thought to be the philosopher emperor. He's kind of the representative of that. He writes, "Don't put too much attention or any attention into reds or blues." And I read that and I was like, what does that mean? And I looked into it. I read into it. I was like, what does he mean? He's like, oh, those are the gladiator teams. Those were, they would go into the Forum, they would go into the Coliseum, and there would be red and blue. Now, I'm a Ducks fan, green and yellow all day, right? Big game. We'll talk about Coach. I'm going to do a shout out to Coach Prime. I love him. I respect what he's doing, but he's in Never Rains in Autzen, man. It's going to be a thing this weekend.
He might be in for some trouble this weekend.
I think he is, man. I respect him. I respect Shador, his
Finish
son.
this thing, what you were saying, and then I
Okay.
want to talk about Coach Prime.
Okay, cool. So red and blues, right?
Right.
His point. This is Marcus Aurelius, right? A
Uh-huh.
Roman emperor, considered one of the great Stoic philosophers, the inspiration but behind the philosopher king. He also is, immortalized in the movie Gladiator. The thoughtful emperor that's supposed to be Marcus Aurelius.
The one who gets murdered at the beginning of the movie?
By his son, by Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah. Okay.
And regardless, it was interesting to hear him write that in his pondering philosophical notebooks. Because what he meant by it was not whether he wanted red or blue to win. It was, don't put too much into the tribalism, into the passive idea of, if this thing out of my control happens, then I'm going to have anxiety or loss. If this other thing happens, if blue wins instead of red, what does that have to do with my central well-being and my core and my ability to lead and live my life? And I loved that.
Man, there's this idea, if we're talking about anxiety, and man, one thing before we get too deep into anxiety, if you were diagnosed with ADHD, take the good and leave the bad. Lean in.
Yeah.
Lean into the good things about ADHD. Lean in. Like, if I imagine your personality changed a little bit when you were medicated. Am I right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay. I don't want my personality to change. The people love me because I am the way I am. I'm sure I would be more locked in. I guess I could read a whole book in an hour if I was on a bunch of stuff, but it would change who I am.
Yeah.
And so I know about how sensitive I am to things. I know that like noise comes in and I can't focus. And it used to, before I really understood my ADHD, I would get angry and I would lose my temper. Now I know, I'm uber sensitive. And so instead of getting angry when I feel like, I can't concentrate, I just calm down. I say, okay, this is how your mind works. So instead of being like, I have this thing, think about it like, this is how my mind works. Then you don't have to get angry, and then you don't have to constantly be apologizing for it either. If someone's like, hey, Jake, I need you to climb a tree and you're a fish. If you're just like, hey, brother, I'm a fish. Like, this is what I do. I can't climb that tree, but you're a monkey and you can't swim like I do. So I stay in my lane. There's so many things that I cannot do that I'm like, God bless y'all that can do those things. I can't. But what I can do is I do this thing. So I lean into the way my mind works. And so that I'm not hating myself, because I think a lot of the time, man, our prisons are filled. And I didn't know we were going to talk about ADHD this much. I think our prisons are filled with people who have ADHD that didn't know it. And it led to shame. It led to anger. It led to just impulsivity. That's a big characteristic with ADHD. And so many people in the criminal world, like, they impulsively fly off the handle or make a decision. And so we don't deal, like, we see the bad things and we're like, no, I see that I have a tendency for that, but I'm going to lean into the good things and kind of get rid of the bad things. And so that's what I kind of want to say. Like, don't be Jake, dude. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I love that, man. No, and I appreciate that. That's something that I think, I'm sure a lot of people go through, but as an entrepreneur, especially, right? Like, I made a conscious choice starting this business to rely on co-founders more and to rely on my partners, and to, I was also lucky enough to receive amazing advice from amazing people, one of whom I always shout out for this piece of advice. Her name is Kate Delhagen. And Kate and I met by chance. She was running, I was on the street, and we connected. Now, she has since graduated from this great role at Nike on to doing an investment firm called Oregon Sports Angels. And while doing this, and I was running my business, she gave me advice. She's like, divide your life, your business, right? But really you into 8 spokes, right? An 8-spoke wheel, kind of like a captain's ship wheel, or Trivial Pursuit wheel,
Right.
if you like that one. It's like, and find out what you're not good at. And those are your 8 spokes. or your 8 pie pieces. He's like, and find somebody, even if you don't know them, it's really good at those things you're not good at. And that's who you want around you. Right.
Mercy.
That's, yeah. And she was like, Phil, so, I mean, I'm lucky enough at every day, right? I took that to heart very early, and I've been able to surround myself, and I'm still doing it with people that are, very successful in the corporate business world, but also like one of our advisors who's been through the ringers, founding, starting, building up a very successful business, and then, tripping a little bit, but keeping it going. And it's like, too often, I think we idolize just success or just one trait, right? And if we really want to fill those 8 spokes, those 8 pie pieces, whatever you want, with the best things that will help us go forward to be ourselves, you have to also look at the things that are hard to address, like your failures, like the times that you're not going to success, and lean in. Before the transition, we're getting back to Coach Prime and the Ducks here in a second. On ADHD, there's a wonderful, wonderful book that, again, I came upon by happenstance. My better half, she has always been interested in kind of childhood psychology and trauma. And she's wants to eventually go back to school for it. So I bought her some books. And one of them that I was doing research was called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog.
The Boy Who Was Raised as a Duck?
As a dog.
As a dog, okay.
As a dog. And, I read that, and it's, kind of like graduate level required reading now in these schools. And then I looked into it, and that's the title of a case study. And it was written by, I forget the author's name, I can look it up, but it was written by a very accomplished MD and PhD. He was a PhD in psychology or psychiatry, always mix them up, and an MD in neuroscience at the Chicago Booth School, and then Texas. And you remember the Waco incident in Texas?
Yeah, David Koresh, the Branch Davidians.
Yeah, so he was the person. He had just gone down to Baylor and then to Austin, and was in charge of helping the kids who were rescued from there deal with their trauma. Interestingly, he then studied the neuroscience and the development of the childhood brain when it's exposed to trauma, and then also the psychology behind it. And what he was able to do was actually not just understand psychology, but also understand the neuroscience and the development of the brain. And what this led to was, speaking of ADHD, all right, what this led to is he, at the time of like the 90s, even in the 80s, kids were just being thrown at ADHD, right? It was like, if you don't behave correctly, you just have ADD. Here's some Ritalin.
Right.
And what this guy was able to do was he was actually able to map out a more objective measurement of that said, hey, a lot of these ADD, ADHD kids are actually just kids that have dealt with trauma.
Mercy.
And this is mostly, or not mostly, but in a lot of cases, this is more akin to PTSD than it is ADD. And he was able to successfully help treat more kids and help get people less, medicated on some big prescription drug, and more understanding the core of what's leading them to what you identified so perfectly: impulsive behavior.
Wow.
Right. And I mean, the correlations of that, I truly recommend the book. It's very, it's good for ADD people because you can read it chapter by chapter, because there's different short case studies.
Sure.
But it also is sequential. It breaks it, and it breaks it down into both the psychological and the neuroscientific side. So you can see like scans of the brain, and then the experience, and then the parenting side.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating read, man.
Man, what you're saying about ADHD and the pie, your 8 spokes, and then also entrepreneurship. I think ideally, in my mind, I think entrepreneurship sounds awesome. And I think like, man, I could do that. And like, I heard you mention Radical Candor. I started reading that book, Good to Great, all of these like great books. Man, I'll tell you right now, it's hard for me. Like, I don't have interest. I have interest in leadership. I'm interested in coaching. Like I have a whole book section right here about like different coaches. I love that. But maybe there is correlation with growing a business and stuff like that. That it's not for me. I think it's great. And I think I would want it to be for me because, man, that sounds exciting, but I can't like it. I'm not built for that. And if I don't know that I'm built for a specific purpose and it's actually like the desires in my heart are given to me because like I'm built for it, then like I'll try to do what you do or try to do what Hui does rather than get Hui to help me. Like so much stuff that I do is because Hui is like, Richard, you should do it like this. And I haven't even thought about that. And because I've humility, I'm like, oh man, this is the world that Hui's in. Like he reads Radical Candor for fun. Like it fills him up to read that book. Where for me, I'm like, I'd rather read a memoir, a biography, or something else, you know? And so if you're not comfortable with who you are, you're not leaning into however you have been made, then you'll try to go after things that look cool, but aren't actually built for you. Like if you're built for entrepreneurship, do it, go for it. But I'm not. And I realize that I'm like, oh, I'm like, that's not for me. Praise God. I have these people in my circle that do this.
Okay. I'm going to challenge you a little bit because in a way you are doing entrepreneurship, right? Well, regardless of the path, you did it and you built your podcast and it's successful. And so a concept that you reminded me of just now is that you have to learn what you're not good at.
Right.
The purpose of learning, the purpose of gaining knowledge is not just a singular path where you should just open your cup to fill you with this one line of thinking and ignore everything else. Half the path of wisdom and knowledge and learning is learning context, is learning the framework around it so you can bounce your wants, your desires, who you are off of those things that maybe you don't want. Right. Because I guarantee you is like Radical Candor is a great book for some all. Right. So are memoirs. Right. My favorite books of all time have been totally random. Right. And they like I actually, quick side note, ADD side note, a person that Hui introduced me to. She was working out of our office, was helping us a little bit. And I was just force feeding people all these bios and nonfiction and like anybody in my office. I was like, hey, you want to read about how the FBI and the CIA didn't communicate during the early wars in Afghanistan and intelligence? And they're like, no, not at all. I was like, too bad, read it. And regardless, and then one day her name's Jenny, and she was like, Jake, I'll agree to read another one of these books if you read this one. And man, she handed me this, this book that looked like it was from the end cap of the aisle at the grocery store. I had a guy with a sword and flames coming around it. And it was so out of my realm. Yeah. Like, don't get me wrong, man. I liked the Lord of the Rings and those things when I was growing up, but I never read them. Right. When I was older. And so I pick up this book and I'm a man of my word. All right. I said I'd read it. I'm going to read it. This thing was just thick and small print.
What's it called?
It's called there's a series of them, which gets into the more brutal side of it.
Is it The Wheel of Time?
No, but it's the author completed that one. It's called the Stormlight Archives. There's a guy named Brandon Sanderson.
Okay. And he completed the Wheel of Time after the dude passed. Okay.
That's right. That's how funny enough. And so anyways, I was about 115 pages into this book, just like taking off my hat and just like, what have I committed to? I'm flipping through. And then about 115 in, I was staying up till 3 a.m. reading this book. I was like pre-ordering the next book. I now am like on the website waiting for it to release, and have made friendships because of this book, because I saw somebody, doing it. I actually had a neighbor I saw him with the book, and then I commented on it, and then he recommended me another series, and he and I just, hit it off, and just because of this book. But regardless, I would have never read that.
Yeah.
And I would have never understood that. And I would have never understood I read that without taking in something I didn't want to do, without opening up and bringing in space for something that I never thought I'd want to do because I needed something different.
Yeah.
And I mean, to the 8-spoke wheel, right, is like the point of wisdom, the point of knowledge, the point of learning is to, like, I fully believe in what you're saying, is find what you're good at, find who you are, believe in that, and follow that. I think that goes hand in hand with know who you are,
Yeah.
and always challenge it with bringing in and being open to other things, because you don't know who you are, who you're going to be in 10 years,
Yeah.
even if you know who you are now.
Man, I think there's a bunch of guys our age who got into like, if you're not reading Atomic Habits, if you're not reading, if you're not reading this, like, really, what are you doing? And Atomic Habits is good, and it's like number one, like,
Sure.
for years in a row for a reason. But that's like science, and fiction is the art. That's
Oh
the
yeah.
art museum. That's like,
Yeah.
why would you read that? Right? Why would you read that book and not read another book that can help you grow your business?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, why would you go to a museum? Why would you go to a concert? Why would you go and eat lunch at like outside at a park? It's there could be ants there, but
I love it.
that's why, like, East of Eden is one of my favorite books, and it's just because it's beautifully written and you can see it, and so, like, the fiction, that's the literature, that's for the art, for you to step into somebody else's life, and that's why I love it so much. But I felt like maybe a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I would be the guy to be like, why are you reading that? Is that going to help you grow your thing?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
needed to probably just shut up and
Oh,
take in some art.
well, like, I can talk to you about art all day. Like, my my better half always makes fun of me because she's like, "Oh, you're super into the arts," and I'm like, "Yeah, I am," because I believe in the power of art, and I
Yeah.
believe that I mean, at its fundamental, I think that art just replicates the senses, right? Or it tries to, and we'll dive into that. But I want talking about building yourself, right? And atomic habits and all this stuff is like,
Mhm.
one of the things that we deal with on a business side is productivity, right? The grand challenge boogeyman, or
Mhm.
kind of North Star of today's day and age, right? It's the widget at the end of the manufacturing line that we all
Mhm.
want. The most underappreciated side of productivity, especially with human capital, is that busy doesn't equal productive,
Mercy.
you know? And you talk about eating outside and the ants, right? Well, why does every study after study come by and say a walking meeting is more effective than a Zoom call,
Mercy.
right? And that writing down notes by hand is better than on a computer? These things happen because fundamentally the comprehension is at the center of this discussion of productivity, of getting things done. It's about understanding, it's about learning, it's about absorbing. And it's like, listen, the there is something, I don't know what it is. It could be spiritual, it could be just much more carnal than that. But getting outside and watching the wind blow through the leaves on the trees and just taking time to think
Yeah.
is as valuable as reading somebody else's lists on how you should organize your day. Right?
Mm.
You ever listen to Andrew Huberman, his podcast?
Is he the guy with a goatee who's always talking about mornings?
Yeah. I wish I
I mean,
knew
he comes
him
by
just
my
so I could.
Instagram. He comes on my Instagram every once in a while.
He's yeah, he looks like a linebacker. He's just
Is
like,
he a guy like all dudes want to be like him now? Like, we're all trying to be like super productive with our mornings?
kinda, because he's like a he's got a great story where he was like a skater, punk kid, and like all that good stuff, and then he went into like neuroscience
Yeah.
specifically optics, right? Like the optical nerves. And now he teaches at Stanford and he has a popular podcast.
Mhm.
But I came across him a few years ago, and what I loved is he was just like, yeah, nothing's perfect. Here's how you absorb light, and here's how it could affect you.
Hmm.
And it's just a real, like, straightforward way of explaining it. And I think it is like every bro wants to be like him now, because he's like one of those optimize your life guys.
Yeah.
But there's I think there's some value to it, because what he does explain is just like very matter of factly. It's not, atomic habits. It's not interpretation on fact. It's not, hey, this single solution worked for me, it should work for everybody. Right? I have a fundamental, actually, like, really big objection towards that thinking. I
Hmm.
have an objection towards one size fits all.
Right.
I think that the world is more of a frame, if you want to visualize it, right? Rather than a
Yeah.
straight solution, I think there's a frame built around all of us so that we can find out who we are and bounce towards the
Yeah.
center. And his kind of reflects that as like, yeah, here's generally how it works. You can generally do this, but it's not going to work for everybody.
Right.
And I was like, thank you for the exception. I like the asterisks at the end of this, because so many people do the opposite, right? They're not the neuroscientists. They're not the thing. And they say, oh, here it is.
Hmm.
Right. And this, again, is an objective conversation. This is not about, like, this is about what you do with the hours in your day, not what you do with yourself, your id, your personality, and your being.
Hmm.
Right. But like I think those are different questions. But regardless, man, it's I like what you said about about art and about the moments that we understand, because
Yeah. Like, what
that's
about beauty, bro? Like, I went to see Oppenheimer twice,
Mhm.
and I think on the strength of this one scene where Oppenheimer gets told that he needs to go to Germany by the physicist played by Kenneth Branagh. I wish I could be smart enough to tell you who the physicist was, but he tells him to go to Germany, and then the music comes in, and it's so
Oof.
crazy, and it shows him, and Oppenheimer's looking at this Picasso, and he's just staring at this Picasso, and you can see, like, oh, this brother went out to Germany. He's like, he's changing, like his mind is opening to things, and it's like the genesis of Oppenheimer becoming whatever he ended up, like this genius before he goes to Berkeley. And I'm thinking about, like, yeah, man, like, we're created to take in beautiful things. We're created to listen to music that reaches our heart. We're created to look at art that speaks to us, to read things that speak. Like, that's what we're created for. That and maybe not all of it is your cup of tea, that like it's my cup of tea. Maybe you hate Steinbeck. Maybe you'd rather read David Foster Wallace, but like, there's beauty out there. And if we're just so worried about our productivity and the end result, then we're not even living. And so that's what I like. Our purpose is to shine. And the way we can live, I think, with the most beauty is to know that we're loved, to
Yeah.
know that we're taken care of, to move through life that way. So then we can make mistakes, where we're talking about earlier. We're not like
Yeah.
out here to, like, oh, we're going for a perfect score. No,
Yeah.
we're trying it out. And this is, I think I've learned this, and we've said his name a lot, by Hui. He says our purpose is to create things and to be loved. That's our purpose, is those two things, to be loved and create things. And with that kind of mindset, man, you can go out here, you can enjoy the picnic, you can listen to the music that you might not even appreciate, and see, man, I can see why some people like this.
Yeah.
It's just a much more beautiful way of living than, oh, I have to, be in bed by 9 o'clock because that's when it's dark out, and then I need this perfect light. All that stuff is good,
Yeah.
but we got to be a little flexible, right?
So there's this there I mean, it sounds like you'll know about this, but there's a moment in Oppenheimer that it reminded me of, and then you've continued it on because it exists. The sound design in Oppenheimer, I think, should get an Academy Award.
Yeah.
It is so brilliant. But there's this other concept that I want to bring up, a moment in the sound design in that movie that reflects back on music, art, right? Design, etc. And it's the idea of negative space.
Hmm.
You know this concept, like white space, negative space?
Tell me about it.
All right. So let's talk about the moment in Oppenheimer. All right. There is the moment that the first test bomb blows up.
Oh, and it's quiet for like 14, 20 seconds.
Silence.
Yeah.
Right. And you're talking about a movie that just
It's going at you the whole
attacks
time.
you with sensory input, right? Visual and noise and sound. And then in the most explosive moment, the moment of recreation of the sun, it's silent.
Yeah.
And you're forced into him thinking about what he's done, right? I have
Right.
become dead, and that whole thing. But that same concept exists in music. White noise. If you really listen to wonderful tracks, if you're a geek about it, right? And you go back and you listen to vinyl instead of CDs or old recordings of vinyl on CD, it's because what you're listening to, the romance is in the needle on the vinyl, and it's the imperfection in between the chords. And if you look at design, why, whether you're a student of design or not, why you can tell if type is poorly laid out and hard to read.
Right.
And why you can say, oh, I like this design and I don't like this one, even if you're not a designer. It's actually because of negative space. It's because of the balance of the things around the objects, not the objects themselves. And I think this is, and I think it's one of the most powerful things that we can think about, because you and I are talking about it in going and sitting out, having your picnic on the lawn. Right? The busy not equal productive is like, that is the negative space of life. And let's not call it negative. Let's call it the white space, right? Because people don't like negative and they're afraid of the words, right? But if you look at that, you can see the same thing, that the objects, the enjoyment of your life, the purpose in your life, the actions you take, knowing who you are, is more powerful by letting room in for that negative space, that white space, that room for it to breathe. Right? It's why things have emphasis. What do you like to eat, Richard?
Kansas City barbecue, man. Kansas City barbecue.
KC barbecue. Okay, let's say you have, like, what's the best piece of food from the best joint in Kansas City?
That would be the Z-Man sandwich from Joe's Kansas City barbecue. It's brisket, barbecue sauce, 2 onion rings, a couple pickles. I have it on Texas toast.
That sounds good.
It'll change your life, man. It'll change your life.
I smoked a brisket on a gas barbecue the other day, and I'm gonna do it again. But I hear you. Like that sounds delicious. Me, I would choose. I don't know if it's not from a restaurant. It's just in general. I would take that perfect piece of crispy fried chicken. Right. And I would do that on that crisp bun. It's almost like a McChicken sandwich, right? But like a fancier one. And that would be it. I think fried chicken is the gift.
Delicious.
It's so good, man. It's like crunchy, juicy. You get that tanginess from the pickles and everything around. Anyway, yeah. If you had that Z-Man sandwich every meal, every day, it wouldn't be so good anymore.
Right.
It'd be good. You might get tired of it, but it wouldn't be as good. And then the thing that you would have that's different than that would be better. Right? It would be refreshing. It would cut through. It's the balance of flavor, right? It's why when we have something super creamy, we want something vinegar and tart to cut through it.
Yeah.
That's the negative space. That's the part of life. That's the balance that I think that, especially in productivity in our daily lives, that people forget. They idolize the David Goggins, I forget the one guy who like gets up at 3 a.m. and does this, and
Jocko Willink or whatever he like.
And that's great for him.
Good.
And that's great for him. But for everybody, for the average person, for the ADD, for the entrepreneur, for the podcast entrepreneur, which you very much are, right? Just because you don't write the business plan doesn't make you the entrepreneur.
Right.
You produce the product, and you allow yourself that white space, that negative space around you, and you fill that negative space with the people that help contribute to you, right?
Right.
And your life and your success. And I think that is, I mean, I have a talent for making everything about my company. But no, but this is actually fundamental to what we're doing on a philosophical side, even on a product, right? We have this great core architecture that allows us to do some fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I am now very quickly saying it like this, where I used to think that the shortest distance between 2 points was a straight line,
Mm-hmm.
until I realized that our engineering could remove the line altogether. Right. And we solve a very simple problem. It's that I hate copy and pasting information between different applications. And it gets lost and all this stuff. And so we just said, well, what if instead of building everything around these apps, we built the apps all around these objects? So if text can be in a document, let me also have that text be in a whiteboard or a slide, and let it be the same object, so I never lose one or the other.
Right.
And it's like, it's an ADD kid's dream, because I'm like, I just want to keep this one thing and not lose it. And but like, it also allows me to very rapidly go from like writing, and then you want to draw something, right? You want to visualize it. Well, if you're on an application, if you're on a computer, you got to switch apps, and then you get distracted by the latest thing that you saw, and then this, right? Context switching. In ours, you can just like hit a button, switch, hit a button, switch, and you can exchange. And it's like, you're identifying for me for the first time that it's my ADD that designed this product. But to the point,
Seriously?
yeah, no. Like I very much think that that's part of it. That it's my mind. This is how my mind works. If I were to break it into a linear, I read something, I'm inspired, I want to get that out, either through writing or visualization or numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll be in the middle of that and I'll say, great, this is the statement. My mind gets ahead of itself. And so what I want to do is say, hey, I have this idea for this great thing that blends these two things. Then my head goes, I want to draw a Venn diagram of those things, because it's quicker to visualize it than it is to write out the explanation of it. Great. So I flip through and I want to draw it out. And then great, now here's the business model, and I want to build out the equations that can model this. Cool. And what was happening was, then I would spread that out with the team, and it would get more complicated because everybody would have their own inputs, and then that original document would be lost. And then that diagram would be lost, and that table would be lost, and it would go through this whole mess. And what we designed was the ability for me to like write, and then at a keystroke, draw, and then have them nested within each other. And then I could put that diagram, just select it and push it back to the document, and then have it there, just so I can keep my mind flowing. And what you're making me realize is that some of that's just my ADD.
And that's what I'm saying. Lean into that.
Hell yeah. Because there's a lot of people that have that same fluidity and that same need to do it. And it might be totally different from like a linear perspective. They might start with numbers and then need to go the other way.
Yeah.
But if we build, the shovel for them, we let them dig their own hole.
Absolutely, man. So if we're wrapping this thing up, the main ideas I'm taking from this is entrepreneurs aren't just startup people. It's not just that. Live in the negative space and enjoy the negative space, because that makes the productivity, that makes it hit different. I don't know how to say it, but don't fear the quiet, the negative space. That's where a lot of it's happening, where it's setting you up for the actual work.
Love the in between. Love the in between.
And then I think those are the two things that are jumping out from hearing you say these things to me.
So because we talked about it, I'll add it to this, because that book that I was recommended by Hui and I's friend Jenny, that the guy who wrote the Finish the Wheels of Time. He has in that series, he has one of the guys that says it says journey before the destination.
Right.
And so that in between space, that negative space, is a lot like that of remember to enjoy the journey, right? As much as you enjoy the destination. Otherwise you won't even get to the destination. Lastly, as we wrap this up, I want your take on the Colorado-Oregon game.
Here's the thing, man. I was just talking to a buddy of mine who's from Colorado, went to CSU, and we were talking about the game this last Saturday night. So many people don't like Deion because he believes in himself. And seeing somebody who believes in themselves there's tension if you don't believe in yourself. When someone who really believes in themselves, and I'm sure there's other reasons why people don't like Deion, maybe racism and whatever. But one of the main reasons is that dude just believes in himself. And so my friend said, you know what? Rarely do you see somebody who talks as much as Deion back up. And I was like, well, I mean, what about Muhammad Ali? What about Floyd Mayweather? What about Jordan? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, and also Deion's actually not talking trash. Nah. Deion's just believing in himself and saying, I'm here for a purpose. God brought me here. And I brought, maybe you don't like him talking about the Louis bag. Maybe you don't like him wearing the sunglasses or whatever. But most of it is you want him to lose because you don't believe in yourself in some place, and you see someone who does believe in themselves, and it makes you feel some type of way. Now, this weekend, do I believe that they have the athletes to compete with Oregon? I don't think so. I think Oregon's going to win. The 21-point spread that Vegas has put on this game makes me believe that Vegas doesn't believe in Colorado. If Colorado won, I'm sure it would hurt. It wouldn't be fun for you, but it would make it a very interesting story going into the game against USC. I do not think that Colorado is going to win. I think that they will cover the spread. I saw the Mad Dog said he was putting 10 dimes on Colorado to cover the spread. I'm like, well, good for you if you have 10 dimes to lose like that. So I am very interested in the turnout, like how the game is played out. I'm very interested. I think it's entertaining. I think it's fun. I think Oregon wins by between 17 and 10 points. I don't know if Colorado plays great, maybe they lose by 10. If they're not, maybe I don't see it being over 21 points, man. What do you think?
So I think you're right on the spread. I mean, talking about Deion for a second, man, I agree with you. I think most people are afraid of people that are that confident, that confident in themselves and who they are. Just reading about him, obviously, over the last few years and what he's done. I mean, this guy was a dual sport athlete at the highest level that's played in a Super Bowl team and a World Series team in the same year in Atlanta.
I think he was on that team in Atlanta. I was in Atlanta at that time, 91. They didn't win the World Series till 95, but they were in the World Series up until 1995, yeah.
But regardless, this guy made the All-Pro team as the cornerback, and then was batting 300 in the regular season and 500 in the World Series in the same year.
Crazy athlete.
And then what he did in college. All right. So there's that. Arguably the fastest 40 time, but nobody has a record of it, right? He just claims it.
Well, he showed up to the combine and then ran and then left.
Yeah. The guy is accomplished. And then he's turned into a phenomenal coach, right? He did great things at Jackson State until he switched. He's been able to redo this team, which we can talk about the precedent that he's setting for revamping a team, which is a whole different thing. And he's a great recruiter. He empowers his kids. He understands the NIL game, which is the future of it. That's bringing it to him. All power to him, man. I love him. I think it's great. Now, am I flashy like that? No, but who cares? That's him. That's his thing. Now, for the game, here's how I think it's going to play out. Hunter being gone is taking the biggest threat out of the backfield. Now, Oregon has the #1 pass defense in the pack, right? So they were already doing pretty good, but they've been hit with penalties. And you saw in Texas Tech, if they were if somebody has a big physical receiving core, they can attack that team and penalize Oregon. Now, we also have a real good rushing defense, and they are real poor at the offensive line.
Yeah,
right?
They have the skill positions. They don't have the boys in the middle.
Yeah, and like Shador's fast, but he was going against teams that just weren't that great.
Yeah, TCU might not be good. Nebraska might not be good, and Colorado State.
Dude, Colorado State also put up 500, almost 500 yards on them. And now you got Bo Nix and Oregon who are going to put up even more. It's going to be that. But I think the one threat that Oregon has not proven to be good at is something that Colorado is very strong. And that's the running quarterback. Shador has the ability, if he can actually get out of that offensive line and get out of that pressure, get the edge, he can be real dangerous on his feet. And the Texas Tech, actually former Oregon quarterback, Schaff, proved that. If he was running on his feet, like if he kept on his feet, he was cutting up the Oregon D line. Right. And so that's one place that if he gets on his feet, and they have no running game to speak of, and Oregon's been real good at stopping the run. So if he can do it as a quarterback, he'll put some numbers up, and I think they have a chance. But if he's not able to get mobile without Hunter, you have another good receiver. I think if they don't cover the spread, it's close. But that said, I think Colorado's legit, man. I think in the next couple of years, if they can keep their talent there and he can keep recruiting, I think Colorado challenges in the Big 12 in 2 years.
Final score, Oregon 38, Colorado 24. That's my prediction.
Okay, I'm going Oregon 54.
Oh, my goodness. I guess they don't have a defense, yeah.
No, I think they're going to cut them up, but I think Colorado puts more points and is 30. Well, I'm not even doing my math correct there.
So then they would not cover the
31. Yeah.
All right,
man. We'll see. We'll reconnect after that. But my man, Richard, this has been a pleasure, man. I'm going to recommend the Z-Man sandwich to Sean when he's in KC this weekend.
Oh, dude, it'll change his life.
And what's the name of the spot?
Joe's Kansas City. Joe's Kansas City. When he gets there, if he asks literally anyone from Kansas City, do you know if this place Joe's Kansas City? Everyone will be like, is the Pope Catholic? Of course. This is how you like it's inbred in us. Like we know Kansas City barbecue, man. So
I love it, man. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And yeah, man, I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely, man. Blessings to you. Thanks a lot.